first of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure having you here and having the opportunity to interview you. So first question. The European Parliament has addressed individual cases of transnational repression for years, but this is the first own initiative report attempting to build a systematic European response. What has changed in terms of scale, tactics, or geopolitical context that makes this the right moment to move from ad hoc reactions to a coherent EU framework?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think this report is long overdue because what we have seen in recent years is that we have more and more acts of transnational repression. And the wider public is usually only aware of, let's say, the big cases, like the Tiergarten murders. So if somebody gets executed or if there's a kidnapping, but there's so much, and it has been happening for decades, so much lower scale transnational repression everywhere. But what we have seen is, one, it becomes more. Two, the different perpetrator states, so those that engage in transnational repression, they exchange tactics, they work closely together with each other, and they also more and more link up with organized crime for their activities. So they would hire, for example, organized crime for intimidation work, for breaking into people's houses, these kind of things. And this is more of a recent development with the whole digital sphere, social media, spyware, and all of that. We have seen a really big rise of transnational repression happening because you don't even have to be in Germany, in France, in Spain to execute transnational repression. You can sit somewhere in Iran or in Russia and really be a really big threat to the people. So this is something that has been new. And more, they are also creatively using our own services like the financial system, the migration system. They are abusing loopholes in there and to execute transnational repression. So if you stop looking at it case by case by case, you really see a very big security threat to the European Union. And something that has also been new in recent years is that they went from targeting only diaspora figures, opposition figures, to targeting whole diaspora communities, but also people like me, for example, that support diaspora figures. So they are just testing, I think, how far they can go, and it's time that now in the systematic as they are testing us, we are systematically telling them, no way.
So, as said, most transnational repression happens below the threshold of physical violence through intimidation, digital surveillance, financial pressure, or lawfare. These cases are often invisible and rarely make headlines. How do you ensure that this kind of threat is taken seriously in political terms, especially when it does not fit the traditional understanding of security?
Well, that's clearly something we have to work on, and we are doing with this report. To give you some of these examples of the very intimidating and very toxic forms of transnational repressions that rarely do make the headlines. Some diaspora figure here has spoken, for example, in the European Parliament. We had that. So there was somebody coming to the European Parliament giving a testimony about repression in their home country. They would then get a short message saying, we know where your son is studying in that country. So it's just like, this has so brutal chilling effects because it's one thing if you make that decision for yourself to speak up, but then to basically pass on this whole burden to your children that maybe you didn't even have the chance to ask. Or a friend of mine, she just came home after an event and her door was open. So they didn't steal anything. They might or might not have been in her apartment, but the door was open, which sends a very clear signal, we know where you are. You don't even feel safe here. And that's the kind of message they want to send. You are nowhere safe. Even if you go to Europe, no matter how far away you're from your home country, you are nowhere safe. And we need to now build an environment where they feel safe again here in Europe. And it starts with just seeing these little tiny things that maybe if you would file them in a report at the police, it wouldn't even be followed up by a prosecutor because it's just so nitty-gritty. Or you get like a hate message, on social media. But understanding this as transnational repression, as this systemic threat, then I hope it will help us to also target it with a systemic response and to give these people the kind of support they need. That's the one side. So to support the victims, for example, more security, that there's a police in front of that person's house, that somebody actually checks who sends this message, and maybe we could give that son protection, or that somebody really investigates where this hate message comes from, so that actually there will be investigation, because we know it's not just that person, but it's the systemic threat, but also that we clearly tell perpetrator states to stop this and to make this part of our diplomatic efforts when we meet them. So it's a two sides, to help the victims, but also to clearly call out perpetrator states publicly.
Absolutely. I agree that that's the way. So the
You're
report...
supposed to be neutral.
I am. Just the quick comment. We're just defending human rights here, so the report shows that some authoritarian states are able to use European systems like asylum procedures, financial rules, or international cooperation tools to target people living in Europe. In practical terms, what needs to change in the EU's framework to prevent these systems from being misused in this way?
You're absolutely right, and I think this is one of the strongest parts of this report, that we clearly say that unwillingly we become enablers of transnational repression. And it starts with understanding this. So nobody says, dear Iran, dear Russia, please come and use our financial system to suppress your dissidents. But the fact that how our financial system works, for example, is used by Russia to suppress dissidents. And once we understand that, we can try to find all these loopholes in the digital legislation, in our financial regulations, in our migration system, with all these extradition requests, and then find ways and means to close them. To give you one example, what a lot of these perpetrator states do is that they put the names of dissidents on financial blacklists. So all the banks all of a sudden say, oh, we are not going to give that person a bank account because they are on a blacklist and put on that blacklist by country A, B, and C. But because that's not like an official political legal process, you don't even know about it until you find out that nobody gives you a bank account. And then you can't appeal against it because there is no official list. So you're like totally stuck. And this means either we need to talk to the banks to stop this, especially when it comes from certain countries. Or we need, for example, the European Investment Bank to enable these people to have bank accounts with the European Investment Bank if through the private sector it doesn't work. We have a bit of a similar problem when it comes to consular coercion. So if you live as a Russian national, as an Iranian national, as an Eritrean national, for a long time also as a Syrian national in the European Union, you need to renew your passport, so you need to go to your embassy. You may want to marry. You need to go to your embassy. You may need a certain whatever statement for social services. You need to go to your embassy. But if your enemy sits in your embassy, and if that embassy then says, well, we don't like you, we're not going to give you a new passport, you're totally stuck. And that's where, again, we need to find ways and means that these people are safe in Europe, that they can still marry, that they can still travel, that they still can social services, even if they're blackmailed by their home state. So that on that one, we need to find a solution. And there are more and more these things. Also, I mean, in the digital, we clearly need to see that the digital platforms do not become platforms for transnational repression.
So, changing a bit the topic, beyond institutional responses, what role do you see for NGOs and civil society organizations in the detection, documentation, and reporting of cases of transnational repression? And how can their work make a difference in how this phenomenon is addressed in the practice?
I mean, clearly they have to be, and they are at the moment, the most crucial partners. The security services at large, so like, if I'm threatened by transnational repression, I go to my local police station. Usually they even have no clue what this is. So if somebody comes and says, I'm being followed around by a spy from my home country, the usual police officer would go like, yeah, sure, right. You know? So we need to educate all of them. That's going to take a long time. And especially for dissidents, it is sometimes a very high barrier to go, for example, to the national police. One, because they didn't make very good experience with the police in their home countries. And too often they are still in, let's say, kind of a bit of a legal limbo. They are in like asylum processes. So they also don't want to be seen as troublemakers. So that's why usually they would turn to their diaspora community structures. And this is why it is crucial for us And this is also how we learned about how big transnational repression is if we engage with these different diaspora community structures. This could be human rights organizations, this could be collective political activists, but this could also just be like community structures that are developing anyways. So in terms of prevention, so the state explaining these people, for example, is the support you can have if thing A, B, C, D happens to you. But also, if you go, for example, through the migration process or the asylum process, we would ask you this and that information. We would never ask you this and that information. If somebody asks you this and that information, be careful. That could be like a total trap. So we could use them for prevention, to send these messages through trusted channels in the broader community in their own language, by people that they trust, but also the other way around to understand better the dynamics of transnational repression, because often it's a bit community specific. So how is China, for example, threatening you so that we better understand how we can confront and stop this? How is the Eritrean state threatening you so that we can better understand and confront them? So I think they are our core liaison to these communities for documentation, detection, especially of the lower scale one. If somebody's dead, that person's dead. But usually it's much more subversive, the kind of intimidation, to understand that, and then also to stop it.
Perfect. So for the last question, in April 2025, you were reportedly targeted in a hacking operation linked to Tehran. How did that experience change your understanding of transnational repression? And what do you want people who are new to this issue to understand about why it matters?
It wasn't the first time that another state tried to intimidate me. I had some stuff happening by Qatar. I had a lot of stuff happening, especially with agency resolutions in the parliament, by the Philippines, by Egypt, by many others. But that was maybe the most sophisticated, and I'm also pretty sure most costly attempt to intimidate me and hack me. I wasn't surprised that they tried it. I also wasn't surprised that in one way or another, if only you try hard enough, you somehow find a way in. Two things I was surprised. The first one is, after that incident, I decided, because the message that they want to send, and that's one of the main goals of transnational repression, is you better be silent. And I deliberately decided that I'm not going to be silent. I'm going to be very outspoken about this. Also because I'm very privileged compared to these people. I have a proper legal status. I have a good pay. I have a good job. They couldn't get any data because the European Parliament IT security works very well. So I'm in the most privileged position you can be to speak up. Still, I was quite sure that this may also mean a threat to my family. And I had German secret services having a sit down with my kids, for example, about if this and that happens, how they should react. And this is the thing, I make this decision for myself. I'm fine with that. But bringing my kids into it, it really had an emotional cost on me. And one that I knew from a theoretical perspective, but when it really happens to you, it's something different. And this is the case, for all political activists from these countries, that they know that, sadly, this is becoming more and more apparent that people are going after their families, especially when they're back in their home country, to silence them. And the second one was that when I became public and spoke out, how many approached me that said the same thing happened to me, but I didn't even know where to report it. So to understand how big the scale is and how little there is the structures that people use and understand. So how big basically the dark area is that we don't even know about. Of this transnational repression. So I had the plan to work on this report already last mandate. I could only make it work this mandate, but it kind of made me even fight stronger for it, I would say.
Okay, so this would be all. Thank you very much for your time and for your answers.